Can somebody hear me? Hey, I can see myself. Great. Hopefully you can see me. Can everybody hear me?
So we can hear you loud and clear. So whenever you're ready, you can start with your presentation. Just don't forget to share your screen because
Yes,
we had
that's the
someone
last
not
thing.
do that before. Okay, yeah.
Can you see my...
We can see everything. The stage is yours.
Okay, fantastic. Great. So hello everybody. My name's Marco. I'm also at Goldsmiths with Sylvia. So yeah, we very often talk together at Goldsmiths, but very rarely in conferences. I will also talk about embodied experiences, but in a slightly different way. So I will... You probably have seen this slide from Sylvia. So we're part of the same lab. We have a bunch of fantastic students, some of whose work I'll talk about. We run a master's in virtual augmented reality, which some of the work will feed in here as well. I think Sylvia's probably already said this. I missed the very beginning of your talk, Sylvia. Apologies. Okay, so what I'll start with is a definition of VR, because I think this is an interesting topic of the talk. And part of this is inspired by Jaron Lanier's Dawn of a New Everything. So, I mean, if you haven't read this book, read it. I mean, he's credited, he denies this, but he's credited with inventing the word virtual reality, and has, was one of the great pioneers, and has written this, very bizarrely eccentric book that's half his life story and half a history of VR, and half, the other half, the third half is a philosophy of VR. And one of the things that's quite nice about this book is that it contains not one definition of virtual reality, but about 100, ranging from very serious, insightful, to very niche and specific, to, satirical and just a joke. So I thought, actually, I like this idea that you have many definitions which sort of highlight different aspects. And the one definition I want to highlight here is that virtual reality is an embodied experience of a virtual world. What do I mean by that? So the world is virtual, it's not real, but you are engaging with it with your body. So I mean, this picture had been doing the rounds a few years ago of the kind of VR junkie, this kind of image of somebody sucked into the world of VR, and sort of never, seeing the outside world, and, sort of just slumped in a corner. And I think this is completely not what VR is, because VR is something you engage with in a full-bodied way. Actually, I mean, I've been using this slide a few times, and now since I'm actually slightly sort of since the launch of the Apple Vision Pro, I'm actually slightly worried. I mean, the sort of look and tap interface that they have, I don't know if you can see me, but I'm looking and tapping. That actually seems to me, I mean, in some ways it's an amazing magical interface like everything Apple does, but in some ways it seems a little bit like this dystopian vision of, you're just tapping your fingers and moving, and you're sort of engaging with this magical world. So though there's a lot good about that interface, actually I really want to think about moving our whole bodies again. And so this is an example of a project by Harry Brenton, a friend of mine that I was involved in. Can you hear the audio? Doesn't matter too much if you can't hear the audio. There's some nice dance music happening, but this is sort of an experience where you are dancing with this sort of AI virtual cloud person, and it's an example of how you can use your whole body in a really engaged way in VR. This is just a nice way of showing what's possible. But VR really is a medium that is that is all about bodies, because VR is full of sensors, and so VR sort of hardware. So this is a picture of Christina, whose work, one of our PhD students, whose work will come up a couple of times, but this is just her looking cool in VR. So you have head tracking, you have hand tracking, You have a microphone in all the headsets. Quite a few now have eye tracking. You can have physiological sensors. You have EEG, as we've seen from GTech. So there's lots of sensors that can, allow us to interact with our whole bodies. So, and the argument, this part of the argument of this talk is this is a really integral part of VR, and I'm going to talk about some of the ways you can do this. So, briefly, I'm going to rush through quite a large body of work which exemplifies how the body is important, how we can use the body in VR. Then I'm going to talk a bit about did I just break up there? My video froze. Oh, well, I'm going to just repeat it. Then I'm going to talk about machine learning and AI, how this can help, and maybe this is not really an AI conference, but if there's time, I'll talk a little bit about the implications for AI. So, the body is a fantastic interaction mechanism. It's how we interact with the real world. And the most basic interaction in VR that uses the body is that we have a head tracking in a headset. So as we look around the virtual world with our head, our view changes, and I can do this and look over there just as I do in the real world. And this kind of basic interaction is the fundamentals of what Mel Slater, I think I could call him Mel by this point, he's been mentioned 100 times in this conference, calls place illusion, which is the illusion of being in a place, a different place, a virtual place, despite the sure knowledge that this is not the case, that you're not there. And so, and the foundation of this is this linking between your senses and your movement, the sensory motor contingencies, as they're called. It was O'Regan and Noe who coined the term. So, like turning your head and your view moves. So that's a very important form of interaction, but there are many others. So, haptics here is important. So, we've heard about haptics before. This is a study that Janet Gibbs did with us that showed that particularly the coherent, the consistent combination of haptic and visual interaction feedback created the greater sense of presence, essentially. So, haptics adds presence. This is a different example that uses hand tracking. And here, Nima Jamalian, another PhD student and colleague of ours, showed that actually in this memory game, people performed better using pure hand tracking than they did with controllers. And, the theory is that actually just using our hands naturally as we do in the real world results in lower cognitive load. Okay. The other big illusion one of the three big illusions that Mel talks about is plausibility illusion, the illusion that events in VR are really happening, that we see are actually occurring, despite the fact that we definitely know they don't. And this is largely down to the world responding to our actions as we expect them to respond. And part of this, to me as well, is that we are interacting as we expect to interact. So if I'm interacting with my hand directly, that's more, and we have a response that feels more plausible than me simply pressing a button and something happening. That pressing a button, something happening, feels much more like a video game than the real world. Whereas, me actually touching something feels, if it's the same way into the real world, me picking something up with my hand feels much more like a real world interaction. Okay. So another really important thing is body ownership and embodiment. Sylvia's been talking about that, so I won't go into it, but it's, core to our argument. Everything she has been saying is showing how important the bodies are in our experience of being somebody else in VR. And then the last example, if my slide will move on, is social interaction. So, yes, social interaction involves a lot of talking, but it involves our bodies as well. We have a lot of nonverbal communication. I don't think you can see my video, but I'm gesturing a lot. I'm, I'm trying to communicate to you with my body as well as my voice. Uh, that bit's failing if you can't see me. And so it's very, very important. And so we've done some studies with Microsoft Research, looking at how avatars impact our social interactions. In particular, this one is one by Christina Dobre, looking at that found that actually it's really important. I mean, this is something we've known for a long time, that the match between the realism of the appearance of the avatar and the realism of the fidelity of their body language. So if you have a realistic avatar, people will trust the body language more. And if the body language isn't very realistic, because we're not tracking enough body parts, or we haven't got facial tracking, then people are more likely to make mistakes about their in reading emotions, because they're putting too much face on the body language, which is inaccurate. Whereas people in a less realistic avatar put more of a weight on the voice, which is accurate because it's the real voice. So that was really interesting. We've actually continued to work with Microsoft Research, and we just had a paper that will be in the next CSCW. Yeah, watch that space to find out what we found next. And we've also done quite a lot of work. I mean, I've been working for like 25 years or something on virtual agents, so characters that you can have a social interaction with. So this is another study with Antonia Hamilton at University College London, with Jamie Ward, who was at the time a postdoc and is now my head of department, and Nadine Abaruman, who did the main part of this research. And we found that we were looking at nodding, and they discovered different types of nodding in different contexts from a neuroscience psychology point of view, and then we implemented that in an agent. The realistic nodding was trusted better. I won't go into the details. And we've taken some of our work on virtual agents and worked with games companies on them. This was an exciting project with Maze Theory and Dream Reality Interactive, and the work was done by Christina, who you saw in the looking cool in the VR kit earlier. And what we were looking here was, can we get, characters that can interact and recognize game players' body language? We didn't get the entire way. We just worked on recognition from this point of view, but we had this pipeline where we get people to interact with this virtual character, and then we'd have a annotation stage. And this is really important. This is the fact that we're looking at how this data annotation can be a creative process, because this is a game. The creative director needs to have control of what the interaction is. They're not going to just leave it to some machine learning algorithm and trust what the interaction is. So they're the ones that are annotating, and then we feed it into a clever neural network, and we were able to recognize stuff. So this is, this actually brings me to my next big topic, which is that machine learning is a really nice way of doing this, but we really need to think of this as a creative tool, not just as this sort of, abstract technology. So, how can AI help? And in this case, we're talking about machine learning, really. The big challenge here is that our body, how we move, which is what we've been talking about, our interactions with the world, whether that's body language, whether that's in social interaction, or whether that's knowing how to interact with buttons in the world, or something classic like riding a bicycle. Our knowledge of how we do this is embodied. And what we mean is that we know how to do this, but we cannot explain it in words. So if you take the example of a bicycle, our body knows how to ride a bicycle. If you learn to ride a bicycle, your body knows how to ride a bicycle. You never fully forget it. I was riding a bicycle the other day after at least a decade, and I wasn't great, but I could do it. But if I had to explain to this, and I've tried to teach my kids how to ride a bicycle, so I'd like to be able to explain how to do it, but I cannot explain. I do not know exactly how I move to do the really difficult part, which is balance my body on a bicycle as it's moving. So essentially, the only way to teach a child is to put that child into a position where they, you know, they they have to do that, and then get them to practice. So I can't express it. Why is that important? Because if you can't put it into words, you definitely cannot put it into code. So it becomes very difficult to, develop, really satisfying embodied interactions. I mean, it's possible to have box colliders everywhere, and I'll maybe mention that in a minute. But to really do it well is hard in traditional code. And this is acknowledged in the sort of the HCI interaction design literature. So this is a paper that, there's many people working in this area, Kia Herc, Elena Marquez Segura, working on, using the body as part of the design process. And there's terms like body storming or embodied sketching that, really, get designers to sort of do really quite strange things like hanging upside down in this picture. We really use their body as this design resource. But the challenge here is that, well, you're doing this great embodied design process, but then you just go, to implement it, you have to go back to a computer and start typing. So what we were trying to do is we developed this project with a long list of people. I'll mention the three at the top, who are the people that did the main bit of work: Nicola Plants, Clarice Hilton, and Carlos Gonzalez Diaz, who Nicola's a postdoc, Clarice and Carlos Clarice is still doing her PhD, Carlos has finished his. We were looking at how can we build machine learning as a creative tool for sort of designers, indie game designers, but we're particularly targeting people with a movement background, so dancers and related disciplines. So the first person you see at the bottom, Ruth Gibson, she's has a long history as a dancer, now a choreographer and artist. So I mean, for those not familiar with machine learning, I'm sure there's probably not many, but the idea of machine learning is that rather than trying to explicitly code something, you give examples. It learns from examples. And so how can you design interactions by providing examples? And this is a little video of the system.
Interactml is a node-based visual scripting tool for designing movement interaction in Unity.
If you can't hear audio, somebody shout because there's audio.
To train Interactml's machine learning system. Then instantly use your movement designs to trigger events in your environment.
Okay, so you see the idea.
You're specifically designed for artists, dance practitioners, as well as game.
Sorry, I'm just gonna. So you get the idea. It's able to produce wide variety of complex movements, and the core of it is you're doing it by example. So you're not asking people to learn how to code. So machine learning is often seen as this really abstruse, complicated system, and yes, it definitely is. Certainly, if you're trying to implement the algorithms, but actually, it has this potential, if we get it right, to be quite accessible, because it's not. We're asking people to produce examples, data, and essentially people, that allows people to express their expertise. Data is the stuff that people are expert on. Photographers know about images, dancers know about body movement. If you're a mycologist, you can have lots of images of mushrooms, and you can use your expertise to label those and gather them. That kind of thing. So that's what we're interested in. So we developed this platform. It's a plug into Unity and actually to Unreal. The Unreal's actually, I'm more of a Unity person. Don't get into flame wars with me. But the Unreal version's actually sort of being developed slightly more at the moment, and it's got this graphical interface to set up machine learning models. But the core of it actually is that we're not just talking about a bit of technology. We're talking about a whole design process of which a technology, the machine learning, is a supporting part. And it goes in this kind of loop of starting with body storming. And actually, we started this research in the middle of the pandemic. We got funding before we knew it was going to happen, obviously. So we did it in VR, but which was a really important learning experience. It wasn't what we'd planned, but it was an important learning experience. Then you can, so you actually, that's kind of, apart from the fact it's in VR, it's unplugged. You're not trying to use any technology. You're just moving and trying to think, well, what kind of gesture can I do? Then you use that, then you start transitioning into collecting data, but that's really still very much using your body. You're still doing the same gestures. And then you test again, very much with your body. And, it obviously, we all know that the first time it's not going to work. So you have to either go back and provide more data, train it better, or possibly actually rethink the original design, because maybe, these two movements that look very similar to you, they just can't be picked up as different with two controllers, because all you can track is your two hands. So that, that's the process. We did a whole series of hackathons, workshops, and then 3 artist residencies over 6 weeks to really try and test how people learnt this. These are examples of the residencies. This is Bushra Burge, who did a piece. She's British Bangladeshi, and she did this piece based on Bangladeshi street dance, combined with a sort of contemporary Bengali poetry. And she instrumented this cloth, the sari, and these ankle bells to form the interaction. You can see the sort of the VR bit at the top. Again, this is Shan Fan, who comes from a dance, sort of a modern dance background, and create these multiple avatars of herself dancing in this world. And they then we always want our technology to disappear and not be an important part of the artistic work, but the artists are always interested in it. So she decided to start plastering our node-based interface all over her virtual world. Similarly, Sara Torelli and Sergio Bromberg were interested in AI as a concept, and were actually trying to sort of, forcing you to prove you are human through your movements. And this work is now being, Claris is continuing this work with Kanduko, dance company in the UK, of dancers, of disabled dancers, and dancers with diverse bodies. So that's very interesting work. So what did we find out? So I think the core of this really is not so much the outputs, but the process, because I'm interested in making tools. Actually, if us computer scientists make good tools, then creative people will be able to do the really interesting stuff. So first off, people loved that you could prototype stuff by moving. I mean, this was really what they was looking for, and they were able to do it. So this was, big time success. Though the challenge was that, how they understood their movements were in their own embodied way was different from how the machines understood it. The features, representations the machine learning had. So this tool allowed them to use their own embodied understanding quite directly, but still there was a mismatch there that they had to overcome. I'll skip this bit. And then the last point is that actually the process, because they were doing it themselves and they were using their bodies, they call it's a very me-centric design. So so it was, actually they were very much designing for a body their size, their way of movement. And so there is a risk in this way of doing things that you become, you lose that broad accessibility. And in fact, I'll briefly show this slide. don't want to get into too much detail about the implications for AI, because this is an AI conference and this is the end of the day and I'm keeping you from your drinks. But I think, this is a great prototyping tool, but we also need engineering machine learning to deliver a product to market, in a sense. So it's great for as doing sort of low fidelity quick prototyping, but actually then you need to go away and do it really properly. The last thing I'll say about this as a tool is that the question is, does it actually produce better? I'll maybe stop sharing because I finished with my slides. So does using machine learning in this way actually produce better interfaces and better forms of interaction? And we've just done a master's study with fantastic master student Tom Lawrence, who's tested that out. And essentially the answer is it's subtle, because he basically got together with people and designed these really good machine learning interfaces, and then did his best to replicate them with box colliders. So the simple standard Unity way of doing it, and he actually replicated it quite well. So it worked on several levels quite well, but there wasn't, it was more constraining. You didn't have the freedom to experiment. So he was kind of doing be a bird, it was like sort of an interaction with animals like birds or snakes. So it was really sort of exciting, fun movements. But people could be a bit freer. They could express themselves a little bit better with the machine learning one, because it was based on more examples rather than a rigid, you have to put your hand up here. So overall, I think not only is this good for designers, and you'd obviously predict if it's good for designers, it will be good for the final design, but we've at least shown it's just a small scale. Okay, so that's it. I won't keep you any longer because your bodies probably are waiting for nice food and drink and to stand up and walk around a little bit. But thank you very much. Very sorry I couldn't be here. I was, we were all stuck at Heathrow Airport at 9 at night, cursing that we couldn't get our plane. But next year, I will see you all in Bochum.
Okay, Marco, thanks so much.